We define leadership so people know what it is first and foremost. And then we just talk about it and we kind of just beat it in to make sure that it's not just a one conversation that we have or a card that they get or something that's posted on the wall. It's something that we're talking about every day so they know that, hey, look, we think these things are important to lead well. But serving your teams are a big part of that. If I just kind of sum up what leadership is, it's just, show up and serve your teams. Show up and serve the people that are coming to work in your area every day. That's the most important part of leadership.
Welcome to the Unleashing Leaders podcast, where we work with willing leaders to accelerate the changes you seek. We'll learn from the experiences of different leaders facing real challenges and distill practical, purposeful steps to apply in your context. I'm Lee Scott, your curious co-pilot. Together, let's make positive changes for our companies and communities. Today, we're joined by Jason Lippert, who is the CEO of Lippert Component Industries, publicly traded, but originally a family business, and a remarkable story in its own right to see that family contribution leadership continue even into private sector business. So Jason, great to have you on the show here today. Looking forward to leading about how you are scaling leadership all the way down to the front line of your teams.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast, Lee. This is awesome. I love telling our story. We're like you said, a publicly traded business on the New York Stock Exchange, 15,000 people, 5 billion in revenues. We're a manufacturer. We make a lot of parts and components for different vehicles, largely RVs, boats, a lot of specialty vehicles. So I'm happy to be here and let's dive in.
So Jason, you had mentioned something that everybody talks about doing, which is if you want to expand the leadership capacity to really unleash the leadership in your organization, it starts with being intentional with your plans for doing that. And how do you get that done? And so many folks focus just on the executive level, right? The C-suite and maybe top managers. But you're doing something which very few people still do at all, right? Like it's still such a small number. Not only have you been doing that, you're taking it all the way down to the front line, folks on the manufacturing, folks who are on sales. Tell us a little bit about why that's important to you and why you think as a private sector business, why is that important to do?
Yeah, so we're 15,000 people, like I explained. 95+% of those people are on the front lines of our business making parts. So, if we don't get leadership right at the front lines of our business, then leadership just isn't going to be right. And you said it. A lot of companies just focus up at the top level, the C-suite, the executive level, maybe down to the director level, and that's where leadership coaching and that interface stops. But we believe to just take it right to the front lines of our business, because if you've got a leader that's got 10 or 20 people in their purview, they're making parts, how is that leader leading? How that leader leads those other 10 or 20 people really determine the quality, the safety, the efficiency, whether these people are coming to work with passion and energy and love working for the leader, which ultimately that passion energy flows right into the parts they're making. And, as a manufacturer, that's really important that we get leadership right at the front lines.
100% agree. Some of the most rewarding leadership programs I've been involved with were folks working exactly on the front lines, the forklift operators, the maintenance workers, the technicians, the electricians. And sometimes I got why am I here? Why are you bothering me? Let me just do my job.
Yeah.
But by the end of it, it was always like, man, this was awesome. I've never been able to do something like this before. So have you run into that kind of from their perspective? I mean, it's to their benefit, but have you gotten some of that resistance from some of those frontline folks?
Yeah, every week. And so I do listening sessions every week. I mean, we have a whole culture department that trains our frontline team members and leaders on a regular basis. But I do a listening session every week. I've actually done 3 this week. And I always ask the question when I'm sitting in front of our frontline team members, what company have you ever worked for that's giving you leadership coaching and training, whether it's sitting in an hour and a half session with me or just the training that our culture department lends to the front lines of our business on a weekly basis? And the answer predominantly is they just haven't had that kind of attention and focus on why leadership matters and what leadership is and why it's important, why culture is important in the business. They've just never had that kind of understanding. So what does everybody typically resort to? Well, it's just working as hard as I can to get the job done, punching in, get my work done, clocking out. And that's the extent of what people's purpose and meaning is in a typical day of a life of a manufacturing team member. That's what it is. And it can be a whole lot more if we just be intentional about it.
Well, you're demonstrating by example that And this part of our philosophy of leadership is that leadership is not contingent upon your position. I think a lot of folks think leadership means I have a higher level position. You obviously reject that notion. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what your kind of working definition of leadership is with when you're having these conversations to develop leadership?
Yeah, so we've defined leadership for the company just for that specific reason. We've got 5 leader qualities, we've got 5 core values, and we talk about these and keep these things in the airspace, in our 5-minute meetings, just daily meetings and conversations we have during the day, our board walks, all that kind of stuff. So, we define leadership so people know what it is first and foremost. And then we just talk about it and we kind of just beat it in to make sure that it's not just a one conversation that we have or a card that they get or something that's posted on the wall. It's something that we're talking about every day, so they know that, hey, look, we think these things are important to lead well. But serving your teams are a big part of that. If I just kind of sum up what leadership is, it's just show up and serve your teams. Show up and serve the people that are coming to work in your area every day. That's the most important part of leadership.
Absolutely. Now that embeds that servant leadership perspective right off the top. Would you be willing to share, maybe not all 5, but at least a couple of those 5 attributes that you guys have operationally defined, so it isn't this
Yeah.
mystical thing?
Yeah, so servant leadership is a big quality, and we break all this stuff down into training categories for all of
Sure.
our team leaders, and we try to make sure our frontline team members know the stuff as well. But being courageous, so whether
Okay.
it's having courageous conversations, all the stuff that we're doing is not typical in business. So courage is required. You're going
Mhm.
to lean into this hard stuff. You're going to have courage to do it, because the easy thing to do is just kind of put your welding helmet down and work away and not really focus on leading your team. Just get the work done, right? That's what a lot
Mhm.
of people do. Being humble and coachable, effective communication is another one. And there's just so many layers to communication. So many people feel like they communicate well, but when you really boil down to, hey, what's communication? It's body language, it's the words you use, it's how you use the words, it's listening. That's a
Mhm.
huge piece of communication. And most people don't think about those things until they get educated and schooled up on it. So those are some of the things we focus on when it comes to what leadership is. And we only talk about those 5 things.
So having a service mindset, I heard courageous. So you're willing to take on the difficult things. I heard communication, and it's the two-way, and it's all the different modes, right? It's not just what you're saying, it's how you're listening and your body language along the way too. And I heard some humility. I'm hearing some really fundamental things. And again,
Yeah.
that's accessible to anybody in
Yes.
any role in an organization and can advance the performance of that team, the experience to the customer, and honestly, your legal and your physical safety as well.
Right.
You see it a physical risk and a safety mindset, and you don't have the courage to speak up about it, right? You just chose to jeopardize somebody else's personal well-being and potentially their life. And so being a leader to speak up on something that raises a safety issue is again accessible to everybody.
These are things that any human being can learn. It just requires practice. And that's what we teach these guys and gals. It's like, you don't have to go to school and learn all sorts of crazy new things to be a good leader. This stuff is all stuff you can learn and practice every day. And when you practice it, you'll get better at it. As you get better at it, you'll just naturally lead people better.
Absolutely. It is a huge ROI there. But you've got 15,000 people. So you're a little larger than most leaders have the opportunity to serve, right? So
Yeah.
has your organization been doing, because you can't do that in one fell swoop, right? You got to break it down, you got to move it through a
Mhm.
bit at a time. What were kind of the stages that you went through to be able to cascade this down so that everybody did have an opportunity to do it? Because I'm sure it wasn't just some decree. You said, hey, by Friday, everybody fill out this template and send it to me. So how did you actually get there?
Yeah, so you nailed it. It's a culture journey is that exactly. It's a journey. It's going to take a lot of time, and I think that's the first thing as a leader you got to prepare yourself for if you've not taken on a culture initiative or journey seriously. It's just going to take a long time. And really, arguably, it's a forever thing. You just keep
Yeah.
evolving and growing and developing it. But for us, it just started with drawing a line in the sand and telling our people, "Hey, look, we're going to change. We're going to change the way we do things." And when people say, okay, well, what are we changing to? How are we going to do it? We set the core values out and said, look, this is going to be our North Star, or this is going to be our guiding light in terms of how everything culture wise is going to point, and it has to be the foundation. So, we started with core values. And then later on, we realized that, man, our men and women at the front lines of our business, these 1,000 that are leading 14,000 of our people, that's where the leadership coaching needs to start, because there's just there's been a vacuum there in manufacturing for forever.
Yeah.
Nobody's really gone there to teach leadership. It's kind of remained at the higher levels. So some people are just naturally good leaders, we found, but a lot of people, it's got to be, an ongoing process, and there's got to be education and coaching there. And we all work better in that kind of
If you leave it up to luck, right? Well, then, yeah, you get the few folks who have an
Yes.
instinct for it. But of those 1,000 middle leaders you talk about, like that might only be 100, 200. And versus like, wait a second, this is something with a little bit of intentional cultivation. You can probably get it to where 900 of them are pretty good at it.
Right.
And then like what the magnitude of a difference that it makes for a business where I've got the lucky 200 that happen to have a knack for it versus like I've got now 900 who are pretty
Right.
solid at it. Suddenly you're like, that's the cheapest investment I can make.
That's right.
Even that's amazing. And that would have been worthwhile. But you
Yeah.
literally took that last step to say, you know what? And those other 14,000 men and women, they deserve to have a personal leadership development plan. And you incorporate both personal and professional
Right.
goals. So could you tell us a little bit about what that looks like? Because I think some folks might be struggling to even get their head around it still.
Yeah. Well, again, when you look at all the things that we're doing as a business and culture and leadership development, it is a ton. It's taken us 10 years to get here. So, we just came up with the leadership action plans of the personal and professional growth plans for all 15,000 people. We came up with that idea a few years ago, but we said, hey, look, let's start with our, executive leaders and work through our company. And right now, I think as of now, we're through all of our leaders. Anybody with a leadership title in the company, a couple thousand people in total, have a leadership action plan. We've gotten into the facilities for our frontline team members. So not only frontline leaders have action plans, but now some of our frontline team members. So our goal is by the end of next year is to get through all 15,000 people. So the one thing I'd encourage people to do is just give it time.
Yeah.
But for frontline team members to have leadership action plans, their leader needs to go through the process and understand it first, so they can talk about it. They can share theirs with their team, and they can just have more productive discussion about it once they've gone through it. So that's kind of the stage that we're at. But I'm telling you the stories that have come out of whether it's personal transformation in just major ways or just little tiny impacts that it's made in people's lives because they're starting to write goals and dreams down on cards and put actions to those and have accountability partners in the business, ask them how those are coming and work through those things. It's been amazing.
Well, I dream of a day, brother, where this is what's happening in our primary educational school. I know they are in some schools. I'm not knocking all of them. They definitely are. But I'd love that to be the norm where you're graduating and you have this. But hey, for those that didn't get it, we're catching them up now, right?
That's right.
I want to zip back to a little bit is I think often we hear the leadership action plan or the personal development plan, whatever the current terminology is in your organization, because everybody's got their flavor of it. So much of the emphasis ends up being on the document or the card or the template. And I think that's a useful vehicle. It's a stencil, it's a template. But you mentioned that in order for that to work, there's got to be a conversation.
Yes.
And that's what really breathes life into these. And I loved how you mentioned that, those frontline leaders have to be able to have a meaningful conversation.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a check the box exercise. And you're going to get garbage in, garbage out. So what could you tell us a little bit about how you, for those frontline leaders who have P&L responsibilities, they're trying to meet production quotas, they've got customer complaints they're dealing with, maybe not with you, but they're dealing with it. How did you capture their attention long enough to be able to then invest in having those conversations so it doesn't default into a check the box exercise? Is that a challenge you guys have been facing? And what have you guys been doing with that?
Yeah. So I think as we've worked through a better culture, we've got people staying here longer. There's not so much, hey, we take this person off the line to work with them on their leadership action plan or that person. When turnover's down and retention's high because culture's good and people are wanting to come back and see what's next for them and their journey here at this company because it's more than what they've seen at other companies, things are just smoother. We can make time for that. So time isn't really the issue. It's the accountability process. It's making sure that, hey, look, put a name on your card because somebody's got to hold you accountable. We're all awful, really, in general, at holding ourselves accountable. We tend to just delay things and kick things down the road. But when we put somebody's name or multiple people's name down on, hey, look, these people are going to hold me accountable. We're going to meet once a quarter or once every couple months and go
Yeah.
through where I'm at on my goals. You're generally going to show up to those meetings and say, okay, here's where I'm at,
Yeah.
versus just delaying it on your own. So the accountability process is
That sounds key. Yeah.
important. And then not making it an option for people is important too. We're relentless about just making sure that this is part of what we do. And if you want to be a part of this organization, you love all the things that we do here, this is
Mhm.
just one of those things that we do. And while it may be hard and a lot of people haven't ever done it before, once they lean through the discomfort of going through the process one or two times, they start accomplishing goals and start realizing, man, this is like totally worth it.
Excellent. Excellent. So what I'm hearing is there was a priming of the pump that kind of had to happen, right? Being
Yep.
clear on these are the things we value and sticking with that and being intentional enough and repetitive enough on that wasn't just a
Yes.
fly by night. Then you're able to say, okay, well, in order to live into these values, that means we've got to be investing in ourselves and growing and developing. So let's get our leaders, that 1,000 group there, up to snuff with they've got written plans that are
Mhm.
about how they're going to grow and they're building the skills and they're learning by example with those skills. And then you're able to then take it and say, okay, now let's go to the next level. And meanwhile, that front line's been seeing all this stuff on culture and they're receiving the benefits. And they're like, yeah, I kind of like being here with this. This feels different. Their leaders showing up in a different way. So they're like,
Yeah.
there's something going on there. So by the time you're getting to them, there's already all these preconditions that are
There's
set.
interest.
So now it's a pull versus a push.
That's right. The only things I'd add to that are you have to be on top and consistent about accountability. There's maybe some bad actors or people that don't want to go along on the journey. They can hold literally a whole plant back sometimes. So you've got to be getting people that aren't there coached up so that they're ready for it. Or especially if they're leading,
Mhm.
they're helping lead the charge. And if they're not, you got to be ready to move them out of the organization and make the necessary changes, or otherwise you end up spinning your wheels and treading a lot of water. So having that accountability piece there is really important.
Absolutely. And I imagine you probably got your culture team is they're
Yeah.
providing the resources
Absolutely.
and they're also providing the reporting to say this person doesn't have any evidence they have any.
Yeah.
And yeah,
You took the words right out of my mouth. You can't do any of this without dedicating some resources to culture, because HR is just not going to have the time. Your operations teams are not going to have the time to do it. And you need somebody that's going to keep the momentum going with respect to whether it's core values, rollout, the leader qualities, all the other things we do from personal development to health and well-being, everything that culture is responsible for, chaplaincy. It's important that you've got a team and a resource there to help keep that moving all the time. And one of the things that having a team or a dedicated resource there that a lot of other companies don't, you're telling your team members that, hey, look, we value culture. We value leadership development. We value it so much. We've got people in the space where most companies don't. And that sends them a positive message.
no, that's been a huge shift that we've seen. I mean, and you're large enough where you have your own internal division. I'm even seeing it now with small organizations. They at least have a person, but then they supplement it. Like that's where Unleashing Leaders comes in, where we're like, hey, look, you may not be ready to have dedicated teams for this, but we can be a fractional change
Yes.
agent in that space and support and get you there.
Right.
Something, Jason, I think you've really provided for a lot of folks today is hope. Smaller businesses who have, frontline employees that maybe aren't sitting at a computer all day long, right? They're
Yeah.
out in the field, they're technicians, they're treating patients, they're doing things of that nature. It's like, but I can't do this with that kind of a workforce. And you're like, well, hey, look, here we have, and we're in progress. And I like the honesty about like, it's not a one and done. It's not an event and then we move on. Like it's a multi-year commitment. But I think you've inspired hope. And I think you've also demonstrated the benefit that can come from it and the reality of the challenges you're going to face along the way. So I want to thank you for all of those in our conversation.
Yeah. And I think one other thing about just what I see and hear from team members that are at our place that have worked at multiple different businesses, the one thing that frustrates people is just inconsistency. And a lot of times it's an inconsistent culture. We say one thing, do another. It's inconsistent leadership. They call themselves leaders, but they do things that are really hurtful to the team members. So once you can show them the opposite example and then just stay just relentlessly consistent about it and hold people accountable, because there will be mess ups. We're all humans. We're all flawed. We're all going to make mistakes. When there are mistakes, they're corrected and we do the right thing. I just wonder about how much more productive America could be or American business could be if, everybody's turnover was as low as it could be. And then how much hurt would we eliminate from the workforce because so many people feel like they're not cared about. The number is 88% of the American workforce feel like feels like their company doesn't care about them. So
Yeah.
we start caring about people more because we're being consistent. We've got great culture and leadership models out there at all businesses. How much better could our country be from that perspective?
100%, not just our companies, but our countries. I think that's what really we're about with this podcast is how can we make leadership more accessible to more people? So that very event, the compassion, the construction, the consistency of it, all of that is now more intentional. Because you're right, we're underutilizing this incredible, precious gift of
Right.
people's lives, and we're getting a fraction of it. And that's not fun for them. It's not good for business. It's not good for the country.
And the crazy thing is they want to do more. They want to give more. They want to come to work feeling passionate. They don't want to come to work feeling miserable and
Oh,
beat on. But
yeah.
people show up to work like that every single day across the country. So what would it look like if we had everybody's passion and energy, their full potential? That's up to leadership. It's up to
Well,
culture.
that's what we're saying. It's in there. We want to unleash it, right? Because then we have access to it for the benefit of the individual and the communities that we're in. This was awesome. Well, Jason, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing a little bit of your insights on what it looks like to be practical about leadership action plans and to build at scale an organization that really models doing the right things consistently, persistently is kind of how I would summarize it there. Thank you for joining us today on the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Subscribe so you don't miss a moment that could be the key to your next breakthrough. Let's stay connected and contribute together by grabbing that @Unleashing Leaders handle on LinkedIn, YouTube, or your favorite network. This is Lee Scott. Keep learning, loving, and leading. Our future and our communities are counting on us.